today, which we've seen in the other minor prophets that we've already gone through, but so much of it screams our life today. And these minor prophets are giving warnings that these folks need to turn. They need to get away from their wicked ways and to get back onto God's way. And so many of the things that these folks in the northern and southern kingdom are dealing with are same stuff that we're dealing with today. Maybe a little bit different because of technology and just kind of the way the world kind of moves and shifts today. But the same principles are there, and it's still coming from people's hearts. It's still coming from the way that people are perceiving life and what is after this life here on this earth. And so as we go through this, we find ourselves going into once again, a good time of the northern kingdom. So they've had all this prosperity, which, as we talked about in the beginning of December or beginning of October, I guess, before Ella was born, they have this prosperity, which has started to cause some issues. And so as they have this prosperity come in, they start to rely more on their money and their possessions. Now they're starting to do calf worship and things of that nature. And so they start to go into that. And the name Hosea actually means salvation. And so it's a salvation, a deliverance, a help, which is what God is to us. And that's what he should be to us. And that's what this message should be drawing to them, because they find themselves in this circumstance where doom is coming to them. We've talked about this a couple minor prophets now, but doom is coming to them. Assyria is coming to them because they're failing to repent. But God is still salvation. God is still deliverance. And you can see this if you go back to Numbers 13, verse 8 or so. But it was also the name of the great military leader that followed after Moses, right before Joshua's name was changed there in Numbers 13. But as you go to look into this, you can start to see that Jeroboam the second is one of the kings. We have a couple mentioned there in the first couple verses of chapter 1 of Hosea. But they've kind of expanded their kingdom. They've expanded their borders and things of that nature. And so they have all these things that have started to increase. But what you have is Jeroboam introduced the calf worship, and now Jeroboam II has started to introduce Baal and stuff like that. And so now you start to have idol worship, you have calf worship, you have all these different things coming in throughout the world that is now creeping into all that. And so you have Dan and Bethel are two different places where they have the calf gold worship or the golden calf worship. And so you're starting to have God's people turn to these things. And you really think about that, and we'll talk about in one of these, it'll probably be a couple weeks from now. I think it's in chapter 3. Could be in chapter 2. But God has given them all these things. God has given them the gold to even have. God's given them all these, the silver, whatever you have, the food, the crops, all this. God's given this. And what have they used with the gold that God has given them? They've made a calf out of it. They've made all these different idols to worship out of it. And so God has given them these things, and how have they used him? Right? God has given us plenty of things in our life today. We might not have made a golden calf. Maybe we have. I don't know. Right? We may not have made a golden calf, but have we used what God has given us the right way? Have we used it for a way that is beneficial to the kingdom, beneficial to our own soul, beneficial to the souls around us, and things of that nature? Or are we using them for inappropriate things? And so as you could see, there's just a lot of different things going through. There's a lot of different what's the word I'm looking for? Assassination of leaders going on during this time as well. A lot of the different kings have just been kind of picked off one by one. And so there's a lot of different sin and things going on throughout this. And as we start to look through this entire book, there's 10 different things that we can kind of see that we need to apply to us today. Most of them are from chapter 4 and on, but we're just going to kind of do a brief overview of them tonight, and then we'll kind of dive into chapter 1 and stuff like that. But the first thing that we can see, and this is Hosea 4, verse 6, it says, "My people are destroyed for the lack of knowledge. Because thou hast rejected knowledge, I will also reject them." What's one thing that they've lost? What's one thing they've forsaken? Knowledge. Now, I think AI is really cool. You can type things into AI, and you can get all kinds of crazy things. I put baby pictures into AI, and I'm like, put them on a dinosaur with the sword. It make whatever you want. It's all kinds of crazy stuff, right? I can take a picture of Dale and be like, put him in Tennessee gear. Boom, we got an image right then and there. Be great. Looks so much better, wouldn't he? But I mean, these things are great, right? But what are people starting to depend on instead of true knowledge? Other people's what? Thoughts and stuff. We're not digging into it. We're relying on AI. We're relying on these different things instead of having true knowledge. If we don't dig into Scripture, if no one in here digs into any of this Scripture tonight, who's to say I'm not just making all this up and just lying to you about everything and just flipping every single word? Now, I'm not going to do that, and I'm going to do my best to never do that. Does that mean I could make a mistake? Absolutely. Could Dale make a mistake? Could any other preacher make a mistake? Absolutely. If they looked after what Paul's saying, right? Do you think you should look after what I'm saying or Dale or any other preacher saying? I hope so, right? And so if we start to forsake knowledge, everything else is going to start to crumble because that knowledge has to be the foundation of it. If you don't have the knowledge, well, you're not going to know about salvation. You're not going to know what's right and wrong. You're not going to know what God desires of you. You're not going to know how you should love your neighbor or how you should love your neighbor. You're not going to know you should be praying for your enemies. You're not going to know all these different things about how to get to where? Heaven. And so we need to make sure that we have knowledge because if we forsake knowledge, and we don't have knowledge, we're going to in turn essentially reject God. And then what's going to happen when we reject God because we've rejected knowledge? He's going to reject us on that final day. And so that's chapter 4, verse 6. You'll see that. And so we can't forget knowledge. I think we're starting to forget that in the world today. And that's every generation, I feel like, has their own little issue with forgetting things. The second one is pride. You can see this in chapter 5, verse 5. It says, the pride of Israel does testify to his face. Therefore, Israel and Ephraim shall stumble in their iniquity. Why are they stumbling? Pride. Do we struggle with that today? Right. My own self, I can struggle with pride today, right? All of us can struggle with pride today. So we see it in chapter 5, verse 5. Israel's struggling with that. They're going to struggle with that for generations. You're going to see that throughout the New Testament. People are going to struggle with pride. That's one of the biggest reasons, in my opinion, that people don't turn to Jesus instantly. It's because they have this pride of all these other things. Now, to be fair, if you've grown up in that in your middle to older age and that's all you've ever known, it would be hard to just instantly drop all of that. So we do have to kind of keep that in mind. It would be hard for them, even though there is science, there's teaching, there's miracles, all those different things. But people's pride get in the way of them accepting Jesus. Because when you decide to come to Jesus, one of the first things, biggest things you have to let go of is what? Pride. You got to let your pride at the door. Because you have to admit that you need somebody else, God, Jesus, right, his blood, in order to save you, in order to get the end outcome that you really want. And so if you want to keep your pride up and say, no, I got this myself, do you have that yourself? Not without the blood of Christ. And so we have to put pride down. If we keep pride up, what's going to happen? It's going to be a stumbling block to us. And so we have to remember that in our life today. And so we see that in chapter 5, verse 5. There in chapter 6, verse 6, it says, O Ephraim, what shall I do unto thee? For your goodness is as a morning cloud, and as the early dew that goeth early away. What's their goodness like? It's like a morning cloud. And how long does that morning cloud last? Not very long. And then it's gone, right? Should our goodness in our life just be a morning cloud that's there for just a little bit and then just kind of disappears and we don't see it again? It ought to be all the time. It ought to be all throughout our life. People ought to be able to see our goodness. They shouldn't have to ask if we're a follower of Jesus. They should just be able to tell. They should just be able to see by our actions and by the way we handle things. And so their goodness has left them. That's why they've fallen into these different things. That's why they've fallen into idol worship and this calf worship. That's why they've fallen into adultery and all these other sexual immoralities and things like that. It's because their goodness is not with them. And because they've forsaken knowledge and these other things. And so their goodness is left. We must keep the goodness in them. Chapter 7 and verse 8, I don't know if we have any people in here that like to cook. This is something that maybe the guys would be good at if the guys are not good at cooking. But in chapter 7 and verse 8, Ephraim, he mixed himself among the peoples. Ephraim is a cake, not turned. What happens when you don't turn a cake that actually needs to be turned? Burned. Guys, what happens when you never turn a burger if you're cooking on the grill? One side's going to be a little crispy, right? You have to be evenly baked. You have to be well-rounded. You can't just burn one side when it needs to be turned. The other thing is, too, are they getting mixed around with all different kinds of people in the world? Can you tell them apart, or do they look just like everybody else? That's the question, again, that we need to be asking ourselves today. If people cannot identify us as followers of Christ, then we blend in with the world too much. I know some of us maybe like to stay on the down low. We don't really want to be noticed or stick out like a sore thumb. Congratulations, Christians stick out like sore thumbs, or they ought to, because we are called to be different than the people in the world. And when you're called to be different, when you're called to be a light and you're living in darkness, what happens? You shine, and people can see that. And we shouldn't view that as a negative thing. Are people going to view that as a negative thing? Yes, people are going to view your light as a negative thing. We should not view it that way, because the light that we can share in the darkness can have an impact on the other people around us, right? And so we can make that dark room brighter one by one. As people can see our goodness, they can learn from the knowledge that we have of Christ, that we've gained from Him, that we can share with Him, and all of a sudden now we can make more lights. And that's what this should be about. And so we can't be unevenly baked. We have to be well-rounded, turn the cake over. That's 7 and verse 8. You have something? Oh, I thought you had something. Okay. As we go on, and I think this is 5. This is a good one. Chapter 7, verse 11, it says, Ephraim is like a silly dove without understanding. They call unto Egypt. They go to Assyria. Like a silly dove. You saw knowledge mentioned there in chapter 4. Now you have understanding mentioned here, and it even mentions Egypt and Assyria. When they were coming out of captivity there in the Exodus, what did they cry out in the wilderness? What were they thinking they should just go back to? Egypt. We ought to just go on back. We had it better there, didn't we? Did they really have it better there? Or did they just, forget? They didn't actually have it better there. But you start to think about this silly dove, they're without understanding. Now, sometimes people can, this maybe sounds contradicting. Sometimes people can have a lot of knowledge, but not have a lick of understanding. You could have knowledge of every single word in this Bible, per se, right? You could know every single word in this Bible. You could have zero understanding of it and the truth that there is. That's why there's so many false teachings out there, so many false doctrines out there. Well, they have the knowledge of what the word is saying, but the actual understanding of it is far from God's truth, because they're not applying everything that needs to be applied to that. And so we can't be like a silly dove without understanding. We have to seek understanding. We have to seek knowledge. We have to seek truth. And we find that through Christ. In chapter 8, verse 5, I'm going to read this from let's see, one second. Chapter 8, verse 5, it says, I have spurned your calf, O Samaria. My anger burns against them. How long will they be incapable of innocence? How long? How long are they going to stray from me? How long are they going to be essentially in the wilderness from me? How long are they going to keep having all of these idols and these different things from me? How much longer can it be? Do you ever think He looks down at the world today and says maybe the exact same thing? How long until my church stands up? How long until my people stand up? How long until my creation starts to understand that all these lies out there in the world is not what they need to be after? How long? How long? Chapter 10, verse 13, this is the 8th thing that we can see. I lied. 7. Number 7 thing. Chapter 8, verse 12. I wrote for him, speaking of Ephraim, the 10,000 things of my law, but they are accounted as strange things. Now we see this, I believe it's in 1 Thessalonians. They account all these different things that are written to them in the law as strange things, as a foreign thing, as maybe something that's not common to them. And if you look in 1 Thessalonians, we cannot count his commandments as what? Burdensome. Sometimes I think I fall into that trap. I'm sure some of us here fall into that trap. Sometimes we can just make his truth and what he's calling us to do burdensome. Shouldn't be. Why should it not be? It's for our own good. B, it's to please him. Right? We're not coming to worship to please ourselves. We're coming to worship for something that is pleasing in his sight. And because it's pleasing in his sight, it should be pleasing to us. That's how it should work. Too often we get that flipped around. We think if it's pleasing in our heart, it must surely be pleasing to God. Right? That's not how it should be. Instead, it should be if it's pleasing to God, then therefore it's pleasing in my heart. And so that's how our life should be. And so These things ought not to be strange to us. They ought not to be foreign to us. We ought to, again, have knowledge and have this understanding. We can't be silly about these things, right? As we've seen in the other 6 things before this. And so that was chapter 8 and verse 12. Chapter 10 and verse 13, this is the 8th thing on our list. You have plowed wickedness. You have iniquity, you have eaten the fruit of lies, for thou does not trust in the way, in the multitude of the mighty men. You have a whole lot of things here. You've plowed wickedness, you have iniquity, you've eaten the fruit of lies, and their fruit of lies is what has gotten them into, we can see this from the book of Amos, but this is what's gotten them into idol worship to start off with. And they don't trust in the way, but they go in the multitude. They don't trust in the way. Same thing as before. Are we trusting in the way? Or are we too busy plowing wickedness? Do we trust in the way, or are we too full of our life with iniquities and different sins? Do we trust in the way, or are we too busy eating all those fruits of lies? We have to trust in the way because trusting in the way leads us home, which is where we surely want to be. The 9th thing that we can see in chapter 13, verse 1, when Ephraim spoke, there was trembling. He exalted himself in Israel, but when he offended in Baal, he died. When you start to go after idol worship, not only are you going to die eventually in physical life, but you're also going to what? Die in your spiritual life. The same thing. Now, we might not have different, like I said earlier, calf worships and things like that. Things like that. Do we have things in our life that we can idol and worship outside of a golden calf? A whole slew of things. Do we get busy, caught up in that? I hate to say all the time. Do people get caught up in that throughout their daily life far too frequently? Yes. Bless you. So we have to make sure that we've put down any of these idols that are hindering us from being closer to God, hindering us from growing closer to Him and spending the right amount of time with Him. If we have something on our list that is above God, that thing needs to come down and God needs to go up because God has to be number one. The last thing that we can see, the 10th thing that we can see that we can kind of apply to our life, found in chapter 14, verse 9. Who is wise that he may understand these things, prudent that he may know them? For the ways of Jehovah are right, and the just shall walk in them, but the transgressors shall fall. Who is wise that he may understand these things? The person that seeks knowledge, seeks understanding, trusts in the way, and believes in the truth. The ways of who are right? Jehovah, God, the truth that He's left us. Those are the ways that are right. The just shall walk in them. But what are the transgressors going to do? Stumble and fall. It goes back to the different paths that we have. You have the narrow gate and you have the wide gate, and it's which gate are you going to enter? And some people, I'm afraid, think that they're entering the narrow gate, but they've not turned their head to the left or the right to see where the 2 posts are, because the gate's a whole lot wider than they might think it is. And so we need to be making sure that we're examining all facets of our life to make sure that we're walking in the right way. And something that this might sound, I don't know, slightly crazy. We can never be close enough to God, if that makes sense. Sometimes I think we can get to the mindset of the state that I'm in right now is good enough. Why would you not want to grow closer to Him? Why would you not want your relationship with God to enhance day by day and closer day by day? And you can build up trust day by day. You might think you have, well, I could never get more trust in God than I have right now. You can, right? We have to just keep working on it and keep leaning on Him and keep communicating with Him and reading His Word and studying His Word and letting that relationship grow day by day. We don't get to retire from our relationship with Christ. And then one day we're like, all right, I get to hang it up and just, mail it in for the next however many years. Until our final breath, we should be working on our relationship with Christ. Even if it is in a good state, why not make it better, right? And we should be aiming for perfection. I like to always say, aim for perfection, and you will hit something good. And so those are the 10 different things that we're going to see throughout this book. But Your reminder number one is knowledge. We can't forsake knowledge. Number two, we can't heap up ourselves in pride. We have to lay down our pride. Number three, we can't be like a morning cloud of goodness that is there for just a little bit and then gone the next second. Number four, we have to turn the cake. We can't be uneven. We can't be thoroughly cooked on one side and not the least bit reasoned out on the other. The fifth thing is we can't be like a silly dove without understanding. Six, how long? How long are we going to stay away from the innocence? How long are we going to stay in this idol worship and this false way of life from God? The seventh thing, these things cannot be strange to us. His commandments cannot be burdensome to us. Number eight, we can't have the fruit of lies. We can't be plowing wickedness, but instead we must be walking in the way and not, or walking in the way of truth and not in the way of the multitude. The ninth thing that we can see is that we're all going to die one day, but a worship that leads, the worshiping of idols leads to a spiritual death, and so do walking not in the way of truth as well. The 10th thing that we can see is that we have to understand these things, and we have to be wise in these things and know that Jehovah is the right way, and if we're not walking in those ways, then we will surely stumble. And I don't know if anyone likes hiking in here, but if you stumble on a trail and you bust up your knee, it's not very fun. And I assure you, if you stumble your way all the way through life, it's not going to be very fun at the end either, because we failed to look at the light that is guiding us, right? And so let's make sure that we have the right mindset as we go, not only throughout this book, but also throughout our life. Any questions on those, 10 things of introduction, or thoughts or comments or concerns?
Seems like in this book that God is having Hosea act out how God feels when his people are unfaithful to him, because he had Hosea marry this prostitute who was unfaithful to him. And also it shows God as father in this, because out of Israel I have called my son, is in this book. And so we see God as father of the people as well as husband to the people, and they disciplined him by going after idols, and which to him is adultery to God.
Yeah, so Sue brings up a good point. One thing that you're going to see all throughout this book, I think I forgot an introduction, but one thing that you're going to see all throughout this book is that essentially Hosea and then his wife. His wife is basically going to be the nation of Israel in a metaphorical way. And then Hosea is basically going to be God, kind of in a metaphorical way in their relationship. Because God, and we're going to see this here in the first chapter here in just a second, but God is going to go tell him to marry, in the ESV, it says a wife of whoredom. In the ESV, it says a wife of harlotry, prostitution of that nature, essentially. And so go marry this. And the way that God is looking at it is this is the way that the people are treating their relationship with God. And I'd be honest with you, you could just change out some of these words and you could about just write it to us today and it'd still play. It's still very much true today. But essentially the way that they're doing it is they should be committed to one person, God, right? But they're committed to a host of things. And God's not even they might be going to worship. They might be doing sacrifices, but they're not really doing anything else outside of that, right? It's really just for show, kind of marking it off a book, which I think we can run into the habit to today. Sometimes we just show up to service. We don't show up to worship, right? If that makes sense. We show up to the church building, but we're not showing up to worship because we're not actively worshiping. Sometimes we just sit there. And so the way that he's viewing this is he calls Hosea to basically get a wife that's basically going to represent the way that Israel is treating him. And then as we start to see throughout first couple of chapters, he's going to start to call the wife back, essentially. And it's going to kind of represent how God is calling Israel out of that way as well. So that's a good point. Any other thoughts, I guess, or comments? I do plan on getting started in chapter 1 with the 14 minutes that we have. All right. Is that clock even right, or is it about? Oh, it is right. Y'all did that just for me. It could have been 15 minutes off. I'd have had no clue. So as we start, as I mentioned, this book is written right there around the middle of 750-ish BC. But as we start to look at this, there in chapter 1, It says, the word of the Lord came to Hosea, the son of Beri, in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, and in the days of Jeroboam, the son of Joash, king of Israel. Now, as I mentioned before, you start to have these other ones there in the southern kingdom and Judah and stuff like that. And then you have Jeroboam 1 and 2 up there in the northern kingdom. But basically, prosperity, the same as we've mentioned in the book of Amos, but prosperity has basically been a negative to them. The goodness that they have been blessed with has now turned into a negative. Too much of a good thing, I guess, is a bad thing. And so essentially they've had this wealth, they've extended their borders, they've had this essentially ease of life, and they're starting to slip. They're starting to backslide into this. They're starting to depend on these things. And God has time and time again warned them through different prophets, different people, different minor prophets up until this point as well, that they need to be turning, that the end is going to be near, and that he is going to take what they hold so dear. In the book of Amos, we talked about ivory houses and things of that nature. He says, not for long, be taking those because of the way that you're living your life and the way that you're treating your other brothers and your sisters. And so here again, you're going to see the exact same thing because you've had these different leaders essentially assassinated up until this point, and you've just had wickedness just keep running throughout these different kings and leaders and rulers and stuff like that. And so we find ourselves in this middle time frame. And it says, when the Lord first spoke through Hosea, the Lord said to Hosea, go take yourself a wife of whoredom or harlotry, and have children of whoredom, for the land commits great whoredom by forsaking the Lord. So he went and took Gomer, the daughter of Debilam, and she conceived and bore him a son. And so when you start to look at this, as I mentioned, it's going to be whoredom or harlotry, or someone else's might have something else. But essentially, it is a prostitute, an impure relationship, something of that nature, right? You're not committed to one person, is what you're really looking at here. And so as you start to look at Hosea, scholars are going to argue whether or not she was a harlot or a prostitute prior to the marriage, after the marriage, maybe right when the marriage happened, whatever it may be. I would probably tend to think that it probably happens there shortly after, but she had the tendencies to act this way, I guess you could say, just because of the environment that she came around, which some scholars take that sense that essentially if you were to marry any woman in this time, it would have been considered a wife of whoredom or harlotry, just because that was the entire environment. That was the entire place, which, as you can see, because it says there at the end of verse 2, it says, because the land commits great whoredom for forsaking the Lord. And so it doesn't really matter whether she was before or after. What matters is that he tells him to take this wife, who's going to be Gomer, and this is what is going to happen. You'll see this throughout whenever they have 3 different kids here in the first chapter. But he says, take this and have children with her. And essentially all of these are going to be harlots or whoredom. And the whole area is basically forsaking the Lord, which is not just a Hosea issue. It's a whole country issue. So he went and took Gomer, of course, and they conceived and they bore a son. And notice what it says there in verse 3, because in my opinion, I think this matters when you get to the lower verses. But it says, so he went and took Gomer, the daughter, right? And she conceived and bore him a son. Bore him a son. What you're going to see in the next 2 is it doesn't say it bore him. It just says bore a daughter, bore a son. Doesn't mention Hosea. Does that mean that they're not his kids? Possibly. Could they still be? Maybe. Right? I would tend to think that it probably leans to the fact that she is, based on other verses in the upcoming chapters, that she is basically out practicing the whoredom and the harlotry and things of that issue. She's basically fallen into not being faithful to Hosea, which is something that God is basically calling Hosea to get her for, because the land of Israel is not being faithful to God. And so they're doing the same thing, right? Just as she might be sleeping with another man instead of just being with Hosea, well, Israel is spending time with a different God, lowercase, not another one, right? But they're spending time with these other idols instead of spending time with God. And so it's essentially, metaphorically, it's the exact same thing. And as it goes into verse 4, it says, and the Lord said to him, call his name Jezreel, for in just a little while I will punish the house of Jehu for the blood of Jezreel, and I will put an end to the kingdom of the house of Israel. And on that day I will break the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel. And so as you start to look at this, can anybody think of some things that Jezreel, I guess, would be other places that it would be involved, I guess, in the Bible, or other things that could be similar to it?
The name means God sows.
Good. I was hoping for anybody to give me something so I could get a drink of water. So Jezreel in a negative sense means God scatters, but in a positive sense, it means God sows. When you look at the Jezreel Valley, for example, there's a lot of wars that go into this, which is something that we're going to talk about in a second with the bows. But you're essentially naming your kid after a place where a lot of battles are fought, a lot of wars are fought. But again, in the negative sense, God scatters. In the positive sense, God sows, as Sue just mentioned, which I do think is maybe interesting. Maybe it literally is a nothing burger. Maybe it's a play on words, and God has a little bit of humor, I guess, stuck in this. But Jezreel sounds a little bit like Israel or Israel, right? The two words do sound quite similar. And as you could think about it, that Israel would be the prince of God, is what it would mean, but it would become Jezreel, which would be scattered by God. And it's going to be scattered because Assyria is coming. And so is it a little bit of a play on words? They're going to switch from one name to the other. God's done that before, as we can see that. Mark?
Also reminded me of Jezebel.
Yep.
And I think that's where she died. Not sure, but I think that's.
I don't know. I can look that up for next class, unless anybody else knows it. But no, I mean, it's it'd be interesting to name your child something that is kind of looked at as like a battle kind of scenario. For example, Gettysburg. I never thought about naming our daughter that. Or I heard one person talk about Pearl Harbor. Would never thought about that. Or any of these other places where a war would be considered. I've not thought about that. And there's some other questionable, I guess you could say, names that are upcoming in this as well that God is using to mean things. But God is going to give the name for all three of these. He says you need to call them this. And this first one is Jezreel. And he says, for a little while, I'm going to punish the house of Jehu. And this is most likely because he has gone in and he's essentially shed the blood and massacred the house of Ahab. There in 1 Kings chapter 21, I believe is what it is. And so he is going to get punishment for that. And so the punishment of that is going to be the whole kingdom is going to come down as well. And as you look at the end of verse 5, when it says, and on that day I will break the bow of Israel in the valley, what would have been their, I guess, their best weapon that they would have been using? A bow, most likely, right? That would have been like and I don't know what it would be in today's world. Now, maybe a drone, I guess, is what we'd use in today's military instead of a bow. I don't know. But their bow would have been one of their higher things. I'm going to take that bow, right? And you're not going to be able to use that. And that is going to be the way that it's going to fall. He said, I'm going to break the bow in the valley. And when you start to think about this, what is coming to them very, very quickly? Assyria. Is their destruction coming very, very quickly? Very quickly. And so he says, I'm going to break the bow in the valley of Jezreel. Then it goes into in verse 6 and it says, she conceived again and bore a daughter. Now notice again, as I said earlier, it doesn't say bore him a daughter. It just says bore a daughter. Could this be a daughter of somebody else? I would say it's probably likely. I would say that's a good chance of it. I can't say for certain, I guess you could say, but based on some of the other verses that we're going to study coming up in this lesson or throughout this series, we'll see kind of how she's living. But she conceived again and bore a daughter, and the Lord said to him, call her name No Mercy. Now, some of you all, depending on your translation, might actually have what the Hebrew word is, but it is Lo Ruhama. I probably just destroyed that. But that's why we have it translated to No Mercy. Could you imagine calling your daughter, you just have this daughter, you just born this daughter, and you're going to call her No Mercy. She's going to be called No Mercy, as we can see going towards the end of verse 6, for I will no more have mercy on the house of Israel to forgive them at all. Now, this is what we've seen throughout Amos and through some of the other minor prophets. He keeps saying, eventually, I'm not looking away any further. Your iniquities have built up. I'm not turning my eye any further. I'm not going to allow the mercy to continue any further. You're going to have to answer for the sins that you've committed. One day, that's going to be this world as well. One day, God's going to say, you know what? That's enough. That's the end of it. And we're going to have to answer for whatever iniquities we may have, which is the way that we need to be looking at mercy too, is the way that we want God to show us mercy on that final day needs to be the way that we're showing mercy to others. Same thing with forgiveness. The way that we want God to show us forgiveness on that final day needs to be the same way that we show other people forgiveness. Because if we want to show a lack of forgiveness and or mercy, why should we expect God to show us this unending forgiveness and mercy when we've not afforded it to anybody else, right? And so we need to be mindful of that as well. But he says, I'm not going to have any more mercy on the house of Israel to forgive them at all, but I will have mercy on the house of Judah, and I will save them by the Lord their God. I will not save them by bow or by sword or by war or by horses or by horsemen. Now, why would he have mercy on the house of Judah?
There's somebody gonna come to that house.
Spoiler alert. There might be someone coming from the house of Judah later on, right? And if you read down to the next verse, right, when he says, or I guess it's in the same verse, into verse 7, where he says, I'm not going to save them by a bow. I'm not going to save them by a sword. I'm not going to save them by war, by horses, by horsemen. How's he going to save them? How's he really going to save all of mankind when you really put this whole story together? It's going to be the blood of Christ. So what eventually is going to save everything. We're going to see that later on too, because we're going to kind of start to see all these people are going to be gathered together, and all the seed, right, of Abraham. Well, it's going to miraculously get a lot bigger whenever Christ gets involved, and also now Gentiles are introduced and things like that. God's not coming to establish a kingdom. God is not coming to save us with the sword or by a war or by anything like that. He has come to save us with the blood of Christ, that we can be cleansed in and then have a home in heaven. So he's going to have this mercy in the house of Judah because it's going to be the lineage where Jesus is going to come from. And if you think about that, I always like to relate this back to the story of Joseph. But if God did not have, it is crazy when you think about just how far in advance God was thinking of all these different steps. But if Joseph was not basically saved and captured and all these different things, then all these extra stores were built up whenever the famine happened. Whose family came, right? Whose family came that needed help from Joseph? Jacob's. And who would have been one of those brothers that needed the help? Judah. And what happened if Judah would have perished? We wouldn't have had the lineage of Christ. And so here you have a very similar thing kind of playing out, because God is going to protect that lineage, although they are still going to face Assyria. It's still going to be the same thing is happening, but God is going to have mercy on that house of Judah. And I'll end going through these last couple. We'll finish out this last little bit. Why not go a minute over? And so it says here in verse 8, it says, when she had weaned, which they weaned for about 2 or 3 years, by the way, in this time. So when she had weaned no mercy, she conceived and bore a son. Notice again, it says a son, not him a son. So again, it could be from somebody else. And the Lord said, call his name not my people, for you are not my people, and I am not your God. How do they end up not being his people and therefore him not being their God? It's because they've turned away. We cannot be his people. And if we're not his people, well, then he's not our God, because we don't want to be his people. And so because they've turned their eye, because they've gone to these different idols, because they've gone into this whoredom, essentially, of the way that they're treating worship and things like that, well, now he's not going to be their God, and they're not going to be his people. It says, yet the number of the children of Israel shall be like the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured or numbered. And in the place where it was said to them, you are not my people, it shall be said to them, children of the living God, and the children of Judah and the children of Israel shall be gathered together, and they shall appoint for themselves one head, and they shall go up from the land, for great shall be the day of Jezreel. Now it goes to the positive, because he's going to be a sower. And we're going to end on this, and we'll have to pick back up it next week because we're out of time. Eventually, the seed's going to spread. Praise God for it. The Gentiles are going to be welcomed in. Paul's going to mention this there in the New Testament. We'll go over that next week as well. But great is going to be the day when they get to have that victory walk. And great will be our day when we get to have that victory walk as well. When we have that day appointed before him, where every knee shall bow, but we have the chance to be saved by the blood of Christ. And you can't have a better salvation than that. You can't have another salvation but through the blood of Christ. And so praise be God for that. Any questions or comments?
Another thing about Judah was that they did have a few good kings, at least some that were good for a time, or some that were bad for a time and turned to their life. But they had some goodness in trying to overcome idolatry in their history, which Israel never, the northern kingdom never had.
Yeah, no.
Always bad people.
Yeah, brings me a good point. They had a lot. There was a lot of kings to go around that were struggling with all kinds of things. Some tried, some didn't try a lick. Any other questions or comments? All right. With that, I'll turn it to Brian, and then Marcus, I believe, has the motion. Thank y'all.
Close your eyes and imagine a maple tree's leaves changing during the fall. They make the prettiest fall leaves that you've ever seen. Every one of us in here knows that. And so just imagine that for a bit. It's fall, and now those beautiful leaves turn brown. Little wind blows over a period of days, and the leaves fall to the ground. A few months later, buds show up, and those leaves, new ones, appear. Green, so green it makes your eyes pop. Beautiful. Beautiful in all the stages, except the death stage, where the leaves fall. Not beautiful when they hit the ground. Renewal. It's what the Bible is all about. New creature. That's what we are to become. And as I look out over this audience, I think that virtually all of us in here have been made new creatures. But the renewal has to happen constantly. It has to happen constantly. By listening to what we listen to today, by prayer, the renewal for those who have gone through the process of being adopted. It goes on and on until we go exactly to the place where he talked about, that place that we desire. Strangely, you can go to the New Catholic Bible and you will find that it reads from verse 21 to the end of the chapter, and really even before that, all of chapter 2, reads just like the ESV that he has. But the people who use that Bible alone, which is just like the ESV in that chapter, don't look at it the same way and don't act the same way to become God's children. And that very fact is why we have all of these quote unquote different Christian understandings of what the book says, because we let others tell us what it says. Too many of us do that. We need to discern for ourselves. It is our soul guide. And I could be reading from chapter 2 of the Catholic Bible right now, and if nobody in here had been adopted by God, had become a Christian, you wouldn't know that I was reading from the Catholic Bible, because we read, generally speaking, King James, New King James, ESV, and some others, NTS, ASV, etc. We read those, and it reads the same as that Catholic Bible. Discerning, deciding is everything. That guide, whether Catholic or ESV or whatever, reveals a God so loving, so merciful, so holy. And if we look at, as Dale's been talking about, holy as set apart, which is what it means, he is so set apart, so set apart, yet he wants us to be with him. And the only way that we can be with him is to be set apart and to be immersed, metaphorically, into that blood that was shed for us. Consider the Father's boundless love. For God so loved the world, everybody in here has heard this, that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. Now I have two sons. One is adopted, just like to be a Christian you have to be adopted. The other one is a blood son, and I value them both. I cannot imagine doing with either one of my sons what God the Father did with his. I cannot imagine it. So these words about God so loved the world are not distant words of a cold, uncaring deity. On the contrary, our Father valued the creation that Christ, his own Son, made, John 1, so much that he uses his Son, the other one so holy, to save us from ourselves. The Father is upfront personal, compassionate beyond belief, and sacrificial. He loves you and me and wants to adopt those who haven't been adopted. We are his creation, made in his image, as you have pointed out. His love is so vast that he gave his Son to bridge the gap that our evil doing, I'm not going to blame it on Satan, we're just following him, that our evil doing created a gap between him and us. And it all started in the garden. Imagine a father who sees your struggles, whatever they are, your guilt, your shame, and just your ignorance of him. Doesn't even have to include those first ones that we often talk about. And he's saying, I want you to be close to me. I've made a way. That way is through my Son. Now let's look at Jesus, the Son, whose character shines with grace and truth. John 1 tells us the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And a lot of people recognized that just a few days back. And we beheld his glory, the glory of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. And grace is so huge that it includes all of the things that he commands us to do. That's how big the grace is. And that's the fact that he gives us things to do and wants us to do them is grace. It is not absent of us, but only he through his Son and his blood makes it possible. So the Father and the Son invite you into a relationship with them, a relationship that transforms your life now and forever and renews it. And I think I'm speaking to the choir today in the sense that I think most of us in here have been adopted already. So I know I learned when I was a teenager the five-fingered thing. Did everybody hear about the five? If you've heard about the five fingers, raise your hand. Okay, virtually everybody. Here, believe, repent, confess, and be baptized. Well, that's how you're adopted. That's how you're adopted, and I think most of us know that. So, the part of that in Acts 2 that seems to be the rub for some people is being immersed in water to get to the blood. And there's a guy who's a former student that I know from Freed Hardeman, and all he does on TikTok and on Facebook is see to it that people are baptized. In a year, this last year, he's seen to it that 100 people have been baptized. And so he concentrates on that. He doesn't ignore the other stuff, but he concentrates on that because that's the rub for virtually all of the other groups, faith groups, that claim it to be Christians. So being immersed is very important. And once that is done, you are then renewed like that maple tree. And being renewed and a new creature, you leaf out green once more. And when it becomes time for the leaf to become even more beautiful in the fall, it's time to go home. It's time to go home. So maybe you're here and your heart is stirring. And if you're already a child of God, perhaps there's some reason that you might want prayers. If you're not a child of God, then the five-finger way is the path to it. That's the narrow gate. And few there be that find it. But it's so easy just to read that it's there. So look at the Father's heart. He's patient, not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. 2 Peter 3, verse 9. And look at Jesus' promise. He's preparing a place for you in his Father's house. Talk about hospitable. The love of the Father and the Son is so unwavering. Their grace is more than sufficient. Their call is clear. Will you come today, seeking prayer or seeking to become a child if you are not? And if you will. 5:20 what?
5:20.
Okay.
Here.